I thought I was marrying my soulmate until a dusty photo of him with my mom exposed lies that shattered my fairy tale and forced me to choose truth over love. I'm Elara Montgomery, and 2 weeks ago I was on top of the world. I'd landed my dream job as a project manager at a leading marketing firm by age 28. I spent weekends hiking rugged trails with my golden retriever Dickens, and I was about to marry the man I adored. Growing up in a quiet lakeside town, my mother Seraphine raised me single-handedly after my father died when I was a baby. She was my rock, baking chocolate cake on every birthday, reading me bedtime stories during thunderous storms, always whispering, "I've got you," when the lightning cracked. Because of her, I learned what it meant to feel safe, to trust, and to believe in forever. Meeting Dorian Caldwell felt like fate. It was at a tech conference in Chicago. He burst into the workshop late, coffee spilling down his crisp white shirt, and apologized with a grin so genuine my heart involuntarily skipped. His dark curls tumbled into warm brown eyes that lit up as he laughed at my sarcastic comment about corporate buzzwords. We ended up sharing lunch and spent the rest of the day trading stories about our favorite jazz records and our dream hikes. By the end of the weekend, he'd walked me to my car and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. "I'll text you," he'd promised, and he did. Over the next 2 years, he became my study partner, then my boyfriend, then my everything. Dating him was pure magic. He surprised me with candlelit dinners on my apartment balcony, coaxed me to late-night jazz shows where the saxophone solos melted my stress away, and sent me corny voice notes every morning. "Good morning, Starlight, go conquer your world." He even adopted Dickens on weekends, turning our hikes into 3-legged races of laughter. When he got down on one knee on a rooftop at sunset, ring in hand, promising me forever, I cried tears of joy and said yes. It felt like the prologue to a perfect story. Wedding planning was a whirlwind of blush linens, white lilies, and jazz ensembles. My mom fell back into her role as my biggest fan, helping me try on dresses, attending cake tastings, and fawning over floral arrangements. Yet between her cheers, I noticed subtle hesitations. At my first bridal fitting, she clutched her lap, her smile a fraction too tight. At a cake tasting, she sniffled, then fled outside, blaming allergies. I dismissed it. Just nerves, I told myself. But then came the messages from Zara, my cousin since childhood. "Mom looked terrified at my apartment yesterday," she texted. "She whispered she needs to tell you something urgent." I laughed it off. Engagement jitters were real, right? Dorian agreed. "She just loves you too much." I sold myself on that explanation as I finalized seating charts and RSVPs. 2 days before the wedding, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I drove alone to Mom's house and found her in the kitchen, trembling as she scrubbed dishes. My heart pounded. "Mom, please," I said, voice catching. She didn't answer, but reached for an old photo album on the counter. With shaking fingers, she opened it to a page showing her younger self, arm in arm with a handsome man labeled Gabriel Ashford. My breath froze. She whispered, "He was my fiancé before your father." The room tilted beneath me. "You knew?" I choked out. Tears welled in her eyes. "I tried to protect you," she confessed. "Gabriel was involved in something dangerous. Your father died because he tried to stop him." My world fractured. Gabriel Ashford. The name tumbled through my mind. I remembered Dorian's initials scratched on a scrap of paper. Mom always clutched. My father's death. My perfect fiancé. A lie. I ran from her house, heart hammering. That night, I called Dorian to finalize details and met him in our apartment. He greeted me with a gentle kiss, unaware until I thrust the photo in his hands. His face drained of color. "I didn't know how to tell you," he stammered. "I changed my name to escape that life. I love you." But his apology tasted like ash. I fled before he could say more. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of our bed, the photo of Mom and Gabriel burning into my memory. My fingers traced the edges of the frame, and I felt tears gather again. Grief for my father, betrayal by the man I loved, and heartbreak for my mother's suffering. When dawn crept through the curtains, I finally forced myself to call Dorian. He answered on the second ring, voice hoarse. "Elara, I'll be at the chapel in 30 minutes, I said, my own voice a whisper. He swallowed audibly. "Please," he said. "Just talk to me." I arrived to find him pacing before the altar, suit slightly rumpled, eyes red. My heart twisted at the sight, but I squared my shoulders and walked down the aisle. I didn't look at the assembled chairs or pretend this was my wedding day. This was my reckoning. When I reached him, I stopped, and our eyes locked. "I need to hear everything," I said, voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "No more hiding." He nodded, swallowing hard. We sat on the front row, where guests would have sat, and he began. "I was born Gabriel," he said, voice low. "My family was part of a secret society, promises of power, influence, money. I was young and foolish and wanted to belong. Dad died because he got in our way. I changed my name, cut all ties, and started over. When I met you, I saw a chance at redemption." He paused, pain flickering behind his eyes. I tried to be honest. I wrote these letters. He opened a small box and handed me the stack of folded pages I'd found on my doorstep. I unfurled the first letter and recognized his handwriting. Heartfelt, raw, full of hope and regret. I read the pages as he watched in silence, my emotions switching between anger, sorrow, and an ache of longing. Each letter reminded me of little moments he never believed worthy of confession, and of how much he truly cared. When I finished, I looked up. He was pale, hands clasped tightly. "I lied because I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid I'd lose you again." He swallowed. "I love you more than I feared judgment." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I closed the letters and tucked them into my jacket pocket. "I need time," I admitted. "I'm not sure how to trust you again." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Over the next week, I lived in a haze of uncertainty. I went to work, delivered client presentations, and forced polite smiles. But all day, my thoughts circled back to those letters and to Dorian's confession. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at my phone, hovering over his name, longing for his "Good morning, Starlight" text. One evening, Mom knocked on my apartment door and entered with a bowl of homemade chicken soup. She didn't say a word, just set it on my coffee table and sat beside me. I leaned into her warmth, and she folded me into a tight hug. "He loves you," she said quietly, "and he's paying for it now with every tear he's shed." Her words gave me strength I didn't know I had. The next night, I drove to Dorian's apartment and knocked on his door. When he opened it, surprise and hope flickered in his eyes. I handed him a small envelope. "One request," I said. "Tell me everything about your life after you changed your name. No gaps." He swallowed and nodded, stepping aside so I could enter. We sat at his kitchen table, the lone lamp casting a soft halo. For the next 2 hours, he told me about his new identity, his struggles to build an honest life, the guilt that haunted him, and the days he spent writing to me, unsure if I'd ever read his words. I watched him reveal every layer, and with each confession my walls came down a bit. When he finished, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "Thank you," I whispered, "for trusting me with the rest of your story." He gave a small, relieved smile. "I want our story to be real." That night, as I drove home, the road felt different. No longer the path to a ruined wedding, but the beginning of a new journey. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time since finding that photo, I felt hope. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky a bruised purple. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, part relief, part lingering fear. I stepped inside to find the apartment quiet, Dickens curled on the rug, his tail thumping softly when he saw me. I sank onto the couch, wrapping my arms around myself, and closed my eyes. Mom knocked and entered with her gentle smile. "How are you, sweetheart?" she asked, setting down a tray with chamomile tea and 2 mugs. I managed a small nod. She sat beside me and handed me a mug. The warmth seeped into my palms, grounding me. Over tea, we talked about everything and nothing. I confessed the ache in my chest, the way I oscillated between anger and yearning. She listened without judgment, offering only quiet understanding and the occasional word of encouragement. Trust can be rebuilt, but only at your pace. The next morning, I texted Dorian, "Can we have dinner at my place tonight?" His reply was immediate. "Of course, I'll bring something." He showed up with fresh bread, cheese, and a nervous smile. We ate in silence at first, the food tasting strangely ceremonial. Finally, I set my fork down. "I know you meant every word you wrote," I said, voice soft. "But I still feel raw. I need to see that you're willing to prove yourself." He nodded, swallowing. "Tell me what you need," he replied earnestly. So I did. Over the next hour, I spoke of my loss, how Dad's memory felt tainted now, how my mother's pain had become my own, how I worried love might not be enough to outrun betrayal. He listened, never interrupting, then spoke of his own guilt, of the nights he lay awake replaying every choice, wishing he could undo the past. We ended the meal holding hands, neither of us sure where to go next, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, our tentative peace deepened into small, steady steps forward. Dorian and I settled into a routine of honest check-ins. Every evening at 6, he'd send me a text, ready for our 6 p.m. truth hour, and I'd reply with whatever lay heavy on my mind. Some nights, it was gratitude for a kind gesture. Other nights, it was fresh hurt when a stray thought dredged up old betrayals. But we never skipped a single session. One Thursday, he surprised me by showing up at my office parking lot with coffee and my favorite blueberry muffins. I hadn't mentioned craving muffins, but he'd overheard me joking with Anya. That small attentiveness, the memory of my passing comment, felt like a balm. I slipped my hand into his as we sat on the hood of my car, sharing muffins in the fading daylight. "You remembered," I whispered. He smiled, eyes glistening. "Everything about you matters to me." My mother watched us from her kitchen window that night and later told me she saw something shift in my posture, how I leaned into him instead of pulling away. Even Dickens, who once growled when Dorian approached too quickly, now wagged his tail at every greeting. By the second month of these rituals, Dorian invited me to meet Lily. Her bright eyes and gummy smile melted the last of my resistance. I helped him prepare her bedtime story, an old fairy tale I'd loved as a child, reading to both of them as they snuggled under a quilt. In that moment, I realized I was no longer just the outsider looking in. I was part of their family. Finally, on a cool Saturday afternoon, I called Dorian and said, "Let's pick a new date." He nearly dropped his phone. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice trembling with hope. My heart swelled. Yes. But this time, it will be on our terms. We chose a quiet autumn weekend, invited only those who had seen us through our lowest lows, and planned a ceremony in the lake cottage where Dad and Mom had first taught me to ride my bike. That weekend, I decided to face my fears head-on. On Saturday morning, I drove to the lake where Dorian and I had our very first picnic. The air was crisp, and sunlight glittered on the rippling water. I parked and found him waiting by our old wooden bench, Dickens at his side, tail wagging in hopeful rhythm. "Hey," he said softly as I approached, voice tinged with relief at seeing me. I offered a thin smile. "Hey." I took a seat beside him, pulling my cardigan tighter. "I needed to come here," I admitted, "to remember why we started this." He nodded, watching the ducks glide by. "I understand," he whispered. For a long moment we sat in silence, the world around us alive with spring's promise. Finally, I turned to him. "I want us to build something real," I said. "But I need trust, and I need to forgive, myself and you." He reached out and took my hand. "I'll do anything," he vowed. "Tell me how." I inhaled sharply. "Small steps," I began. "Let's set a challenge. Every week we share one secret or fear, and we write it down and read it to each other. No judgment." He blinked but smiled. "Deal." That afternoon, we made our first list. I wrote about my lingering guilt for snapping at my mom, the ache of thinking my father's memory was tainted by Gabriel's betrayal. He confessed his worst fear, that I'd never trust him again, that I'd leave him permanently. We folded the papers and slipped them into a small wooden box he brought. Week by week, our box of secrets grew. Unfinished dreams, childhood regrets, hopes for the future. Each Sunday, over pizza at my apartment, we took turns reading. Some revelations made us cry, others made us laugh. And bit by bit, the walls around my heart began to crumble. Meanwhile, Mom watched with cautious optimism. One evening, she invited us both to her house for dinner. As I stepped inside the warm kitchen, she enveloped me in a hug. Dorian followed, carrying a bouquet of daisies. For the first time since the photo's discovery, I felt my family accepting him, not as the man who had shattered us, but as someone striving to heal our wounds. After that dinner, my confidence in us solidified. I realized that love wasn't a single perfect moment, but a series of choices made every day. I returned home that night, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Over the next 2 months, life found a new rhythm. I dove into an ambitious project at work, buoyed by Dorian's unwavering support. He surprised me with coffee during late nights and left encouraging notes on my desk. On weekends, we hiked with Dickens, talking about travel plans and what kind of life we imagined in 10 years. One chilly afternoon, while we walked through the college campus where we first met, he stopped and faced me. The golden leaves crunched underfoot. "Elara," he began, voice trembling. "I know rebuilding trust takes time, but I want you to know I'm committed, for life. Not just to you, but to us together." My throat tightened. I thought of our secret box ritual, of the first time I laughed genuinely with him again. "I believe you," I said, stepping closer. "And I'm ready for the next step." His eyes lit up. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring box, simple, silver, engraved with my initials. My breath caught. "This isn't the same ring," he said, opening it to reveal a new band set with a single pearl. "I want this one to symbolize our renewed promise. Will you marry me again?" Tears blurred my vision. I nodded, words failing me. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and I slipped his onto mine. In that moment, surrounded by autumn's colors, we embraced. And I knew our story was still unfolding, but this chapter felt right. We spent the next few weeks mapping out the wedding. Instead of a grand ballroom, we chose my mother's lakeside cottage, the place where I'd grown up, where Dad had taught me to skip stones, and where every memory felt safe. Mom and I pored over swatches of linen for tablecloths. I insisted on soft sage green to complement the lake's color, while she favored ivory accents so the setting would feel timeless. Dorian and I tackled the guest list together, careful to include only those who had stood by us: Grandma and Grandpa, Zara and her fiancé, Anya and her partner, and a handful of close colleagues. Of course Lily would be there, our little beacon of hope, her godmother Amelia agreeing to stand by her side. Each planning session strengthened our bond. One afternoon, Dorian and I hosted a tasting for homemade pies: berry, apple, pumpkin. We laughed as Mom pretended to swoon over the sugar content. "It's organic sugar," she proclaimed, and we all cheered. Later, Dorian took my hand. "Thank you for letting me in," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm part of your family now." I leaned on his shoulder. "You've earned it." Meanwhile, Lily blossomed under our care. I helped Amelia pick out her tiny dress, soft pink with lace trim, and we practiced walking in it on Mom's front porch. Lily wobbled between us, her laughter pure and unguarded. One evening, as Amelia coaxed Lily to pose for photos with a squeaky toy, I realized that our new family felt real. This wasn't the life I'd planned 2 months ago, but it was far better than any fairy tale. As autumn deepened, the invitation cards went out. I mailed mine and Dorian's portraits, taken by Anya at the old dock, as a personal touch. I spent nights addressing envelopes by candlelight, Dickens snoring at my feet. There was peace in those small tasks, a quiet anticipation that I was doing the right thing. Still, old fears resurfaced at odd moments. One morning I woke in a cold sweat, convinced I'd dreamt that Lily had fallen into the lake. I raced downstairs to find her fine, chasing Dickens through the yard. Dorian held her gently as I hugged her tight. "I'm sorry," I whispered to Dorian. "I can't help but panic sometimes." He kissed my temple. "It's okay. We'll face those fears together." The rehearsal dinner was held under string lights in the cottage's back lawn. Grandpa played guitar as we circled around picnic tables. I wore a simple green dress. Dorian looked handsome in a gray blazer. We practiced walking down the grass aisle, with Lily scattering rose petals from her basket. Her giggles filled the air. At one point, Mom raised a toast: "To new beginnings and to love that grows stronger through truth." Glasses clinked, and I caught Dorian's eye, our silent promise passing between us. On wedding day, dawn broke clear and crisp. I slipped into my dress in the bedroom where I'd grown up. White silk with gentle lace overlay, a dress that Mom whispered had belonged to her grandmother. As a surprise, Anya had added a small green ribbon at the waist to honor our sage theme. I stepped out into the hall and saw Mom's face, radiant, eyes glistening. She handed me Dad's old pocket watch, polished and shining, saying, "He'd want you to have this." My throat tightened as I placed it in my dress pocket. Outside, guests gathered at the dock for the ceremony. The lake was still, reflecting the blue sky like glass. Chairs lined the grassy bank, and a simple arch of willow and white flowers stood at the water's edge. Dorian waited there, Lily perched on Amelia's hip beside him. When I walked down the makeshift aisle, guided by Mom's arm, I realized how far we'd come. Dorian's gaze locked on mine, and I saw not just my fiancé, but the man who had faced his past, who had fought to rebuild my trust. Lily waved shyly. I blew her a kiss. My breath caught. Mom began the ceremony. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke of the power of honesty, of the courage it takes to forgive, and of the strength of family bonds. She said, "Elara and Dorian have shown us that love is not flawless. It is forged in truth and perseverance." When it came time for vows, Dorian knelt and took my hands. "Elara," he said, voice steady, "I vow to honor you with honesty, to cherish each day together, and to protect our family with all I am." His words were simple but heartfelt. He looked at Lily and kissed her cheek before continuing. "And with our daughter's laughter as my guide, I promise to be the father and partner we all deserve." I felt tears slip down my cheeks as I spoke. "Dorian, I vow to trust you with my whole heart, to embrace our future, uncertain as it may be, with courage, and to love you every day, through calm waters and storms alike." We exchanged rings, a matching pair of silver bands engraved with our wedding date, and the words, "Always truth." Then we shared our first kiss as husband and wife, the gentle lap of the lake serving as our witness. The reception that followed was a joyful blend of laughter and dancing. Amelia led Lily in twirls beneath the fairy lights. Grandpa's guitar accompanied Anya's violin in a lilting folk tune. We danced our first dance to a soft jazz ballad, moving slowly on the wooden dock. Dickens wandered among guests, his tail wagging in approval. As dusk fell and lanterns glowed, I stepped aside for a moment and found Dorian standing alone by the water. He held a small letter in his hand, the last one he'd written for me before the wedding. He handed it to me. On the back he'd written, "Asterisk, to new chapters and to the story we're writing together." Asterisk. I hugged him tightly. "I love our story," I whispered. He kissed my temple. "It's just the beginning." After the wedding, life returned to its gentle routine, only now it was richer with shared history. Dorian and I settled into married life at my lakeside cottage, where Mom had generously let us stay rent-free for our first year. The mornings began with a soft lull of water against the dock and Dickens's enthusiastic nudges for breakfast. Lily, now nearly 3, burst into our room most mornings, declaring, "Mommy, Daddy!" with unfiltered joy. I'd scoop her up, feeling her small arms squeeze my neck and breathe in the warm reassurance of this fragile but growing family. Our first project as a married couple was transforming the cottage's attic into a cozy nursery/office. We painted the walls a soothing mint green, the same shade we used at the wedding, and lined the floor with a plush cream rug. Dorian installed built-in shelves for his tech books and mine for project binders. In the corner, we set up a small crib, its lace canopy a hand-me-down from Mom's side of the family. Each evening after Lily was tucked in, we'd sit under the slanted roof, sipping chamomile tea and reviewing our days. Sometimes we'd laugh over Lily's mispronunciations. Other times we'd discuss how to balance work deadlines with dance classes we hoped to enroll her in. Though the attic was a symbol of new beginnings, it didn't shield us from everyday challenges. One afternoon, I sat at my desk, typing a report, when my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, mother-daughter hike with Seraphine. I realized with a pang that I hadn't spent quality time with Mom alone in weeks. Work had ramped up, and I felt a twinge of guilt. I texted her, "Running late, but I'm still coming." At the trailhead, Mom waited by the familiar signpost of our favorite loop. She greeted me with a tight hug. "There you are. she said, scanning my face. "How's married life treating you?" I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. "Busy, but good. It's different." We hiked in comfortable silence, crunching leaves underfoot. At the halfway point, overlooking the lake, I shared the week's stresses, looming project deadlines, Lily's first dentist appointment, and my self-consciousness about balancing it all. Mom listened, nodding in understanding. Then she surprised me. "You're doing beautifully," she said, her voice firm. "You're building a life that blends our family's strength with your own dreams. Don't be so hard on yourself." Her words felt like a warm blanket. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and we continued the hike side by side, mother and daughter walking toward a quieter understanding. Back at home, I found Dorian in the attic office, frowning at his laptop screen. "How was your hike?" he asked without looking up. "It was good," I said, descending the stairs. "Mom says I'm doing beautifully." He finally met my gaze, and his lips curved in a relieved smile. "She's right," he said, closing his laptop. "You're incredible." He pulled me into a hug. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was a moment of shared peace, proof that our vows to support one another weren't just words. Over the next months, we marked milestones that felt particularly sweet after the turmoil we'd endured. On Lily's 3rd birthday, we hosted a small party in the yard under pastel bunting, with Grandma and Grandpa, Anya and Zara, Emilia, and a few close family friends. Lily beamed as she blew out the candles on her unicorn-shaped cake. I caught Dorian's eye across the table. His expression was soft with pride. I pressed my cheek into his shoulder, savoring the moment. In the spring, I returned to the marketing firm's big annual conference, this time as a keynote speaker. My project on community engagement had won an industry award, and I was both honored and nervous. Dorian, Mom, and Lily drove in to support me. When I stepped onto the stage and saw their smiling faces in the front row, a wave of confidence washed over me. My talk was a success, and afterward, my family showered me with hugs and flowers backstage. It was a culmination of hard-earned victories, proof that honesty and resilience had paid off. Yet even in these happy times, old doubts occasionally flickered. One evening, while folding Lily's laundry, I came across the small wooden box of secrets we'd started in the early days of our reconciliation. Dust gathered on its lid. Gently, I lifted the lid and peeked inside. Folded papers with our confessions, our fears, our hopes. My heart sped. I realized I hadn't added anything new in months. Discussion had become habitual, so I set the box aside. Later that night, I brought the box down to the attic office where Dorian was working. "We need to write again," I said, sliding it toward him. He looked up, tired but smiling. I was thinking the same. We spent the next hour by lamplight, each writing our latest fears and dreams. I confessed my lingering dread that his past might still cast shadows on our future. He admitted his fear of failing me and Lily. As we read the notes to each other, I felt gratitude for the ritual that had saved us. It reminded me that trust requires constant tending, an ongoing conversation, not a one-time event. One sunny afternoon, Dorian returned from work, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed me mine and sat beside me on the couch. "I have an idea," he said, eyes bright. "Let's take a family trip, just the 3 of us, to Europe next summer. Somewhere with green hills and old castles. A new adventure." My heart fluttered. Travel had always been our shared passion. I set down my cup. "That sounds perfect." I pictured Lily's wide-eyed wonder at airplane wings and unfamiliar languages. "Let's do it." Planning the trip became our summer project. We scoured travel blogs, bought guidebooks, and brainstormed a route through Scotland and Ireland. Lily helped choose photos on the computer, pointing at sheep and castles. Mom joined our video calls to suggest places she'd loved as a child. It felt like weaving a tapestry of possibilities, proof that our family story was still being written. As the months passed, the day of our departure arrived. We packed the cottage and locked its doors behind us, suitcases in tow. Dickens stayed behind, boarded at Grandma's, and Lily pressed her face against the car window, waving goodbye to the dock. The road trip to the airport was filled with chatter about fairy tales and leprechauns. I reached over and squeezed Dorian's hand. His smile was radiant with excitement. At the airport, we queued for security, Lily holding my luggage, Dorian balancing a diaper bag and a travel pillow. When we breezed through, he leaned down and whispered, "Ready for new adventures?" I grinned, "As ready as I'll ever be." On the plane, Lily squirmed in her seat, marveling at the clouds outside. I took her hand, feeling the life I'd once feared losing. Dorian leaned into me and kissed my forehead. "Thank you," he said quietly. I rested my head on his shoulder, remembering the day I'd walked away from him in that chapel, how I'd thought it was the end. Now, it was just the beginning. We landed in Edinburgh as dusk settled, the air crisp and fragrant. The city's old stone buildings glowed in evening light. We checked into a small Band B overlooking an ancient courtyard. Lily pressed her nose to the window, saying, "Castle!" and Dorian scooped her into his arms. I smiled, my heart full, his meat full. Over the next 2 weeks, we wandered cobblestone streets in Edinburgh, chased sheep across rolling green hills in the Highlands, and enjoyed fish and chips on a breezy dock in Inverness. Each evening, upon returning to our cozy rooms, we recounted the day's highlights and tucked Lily into bed with a story of a brave princess, her laughter echoing against stone walls. In those moments, I realized that our family's greatest adventures were not the sensational ones, but the everyday ones shared in steadfast togetherness. As our trip drew to a close, we traveled to the cliffs of Moher in Ireland. Standing on the edge, the wind whipping around us, I watched the waves crash against the rocks far below. Dorian stood beside me, holding my hand. Behind us, Lily balanced on the viewing platform, eyes wide with wonder. I turned to him. This feels like how life should be, open, unpredictable, but with you by my side." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I promise to always choose honesty, no matter how hard, so we can stand here together through every storm." I smiled, tears catching in my eyes. "And I promise to keep choosing us, to keep building our story." In that moment, the world seemed to pause, the vast sea stretching before us, the sky a tapestry of clouds and light, our daughter's laughter singing in the wind. I pressed my face into his shoulder and knew, unequivocally, that we had arrived at a deeper understanding of love than I'd ever imagined. As I narrate Elara's journey, I'm reminded that facing painful truths takes real courage, and that honesty, however hard, can heal the deepest wounds. What has truth taught you in your life? Drop a comment below. I read everyone.